So here we'll check out Part C of number 3 from the 2012 AB as well as the BC exam. And in Part C here, they want us to find the x-coordinate of each point where the graph of G has a horizontal tangent. Now G is not the function that we're provided with the graph of. G is defined to be this, which we're going to have to use the graph to make some sense out of. For each of these points, determine whether G has a max, min, or neither at those points, and then justify your answers. So if we're looking for places where a graph has a horizontal tangent line, a horizontal line has a slope of 0, a tangent line is going to be determined by a derivative value. So back in part B of this problem, we found what the derivative of G was using the second part of the fundamental theorem of calculus. And that really just amounted to, since we'd be taking the derivative of this definite integral and the x is in the upper limit, put that upper limit in place of the t, the derivative and the definite integral essentially undo each other, and g prime of x is going to be equal to f of x. Now what we have over here is we have a graph of f. So we're going to be able to figure out values of g prime simply by looking at values on the graph of f. So a horizontal tangent line, like we said a minute ago, has 0 slope. When is g prime of x 0? Well, that's going to imply for us to look for the locations where f of x is 0. And this happens at the x value of -1. The graph of f has a value of 0 at the x value of -1, and also the x value of +1. And then the graph of f is always above the x-axis here, below. It does hit the x-axis there, but then it's back below. So these are the only two times when f of x is 0 and the only two times when g prime is 0. So we have horizontal tangents on the graph of g at these two locations. Now it asks us to figure out if we have local max, a local min, or neither at these x values. And to do that, what we typically do is we build a sign chart for the first derivative, and we're going to be looking at the sign of g prime of x on the sign chart, and our sign chart has to be good for the closed interval from -4 up to 3. So I know I'm going to have a potential sign change on the first derivative of g at -1 and another potential sign change on the first derivative of g at 1, because we have to first be equal to 0 if we're going to change signs. Now the other thing that could happen is we could be undefined and then change signs as we come out on the other side of that value we're undefined at. So our other critical numbers would be places where g prime is undefined. And this is something that you're going to have to consider. It doesn't actually impact us here because g prime is f of x, and if you look, f of x is always defined. We always have the graph of f being defined based on what we're provided with here. So g prime is never undefined. These are the only places where the sign of g could potentially change. Now if we look at the sign of g prime, and keep in mind g prime is equal to f, so basically look at the sign of f on each of these intervals between -4 and -1, -1 and 1, and 1 and 3, we're going to have our sign chart and our conclusion here before you know it. So the graph of f is positive from -4 to -1. So therefore g prime is positive from -4 to -1. In between -1 and 1, we have negative values for f of x, and since f of x equals g prime of x, we have a negative value for g prime of x there. And then the value of f of x is negative again from 1 to 3. And so what that means about the graph of g is since g prime is positive on this interval, the graph of g is going to be increasing from -4 to -1, decreasing from -1 to 1, and then it does level off at 1, but it's still decreasing on the other side of 1. So what the sign chart tells us is that we have a local max on the graph of g at the x value of -1, right? Our function goes from increasing to decreasing as we cross that x. And then we don't have either a local max or a local min at the x value of 1. Now, if this is all the work that you had on your page for this on the actual AP exam, you would not receive the point for the justify your answer step. Sign chart isn't going to be acceptable justification. So what you'd have to say to just to receive full credit for the justification step on the AP exam is you'd have to say, and I'm not going to write this out, I'll verbally state it here, since g prime of negative 1 equals 0, and g prime is positive to the left of negative 1 and negative to the right of negative 1, we know we have a local max at negative 1. You could also say, since g is increasing to the left of 1 and decreasing to the right of 1, we have a local max at negative 1. And since we're decreasing on both sides of positive 1, we have neither a local max or a local min there. So do more than what I have on the screen here to justify, write out what I just stated verbally, but hope that helps with Part C.